Please welcome Marji Beach.
Thank you, Hope. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, cool. So welcome. Thank you guys for taking the time to come and listen to my talk. Like Hope said, my name is Marji, and I'm the education director at Animal Place. Animal Place is a nonprofit sanctuary home to several hundred rescued farmed animals. We operate several facilities. Our primary sanctuary is in Grass Valley, a couple hours north of here, which is on 600 acres and is home to our permanent residents. That's where I work out of. We also have another facility, which we call our Rescue Ranch program, which is on our former sanctuary site in Vacaville. I'm going to talk a lot more about Rescue Ranch. It's a program near and dear to my heart, and it's really kind of the focus of the presentation I'm going to be doing today. We also operate a vegan store, the Vegan Republic, which is here in Berkeley. Yes, thank you. The really cool thing about the Vegan Republic is that every time you purchase anything from there, all the profits go back to the care of the animals at Animal Place. So it's a really cool synergy between kind of a capitalistic company and a nonprofit as well. We do also have an orientation coming up for volunteers at the Vegan Republic next Thursday. Stop by our table to find out more information. In addition to providing sanctuary, we're also an advocacy organization. We promote veganism. We believe that farmed animals have the right to be free from suffering and harm, which is one reason we do promote veganism. We also have a thriving internship program where interns come and stay for several months at our facilities, either in Grass Valley or Vacaville, to help with animal care and advocacy. So the presentation I'm doing today is really focused on the egg industry, and you guys will find out why I focus on the egg industry in just a minute. But I'm calling this presentation Certified Cruelty. It's part of a longer presentation that also includes the dairy industry and the animal flesh industry. But I focus on the egg industry. I'll get into that in just a second. But I think one of the cool things about the work that we do at Animal Place is that we rescue so many animals from farming industry, from animal agriculture. And we have a unique perspective on how those animals came to us, how they were treated, what their lives were like, how their lives may have ended, how they stayed at the farm. So that's why we feel that sanctuaries are uniquely positioned to talk about the issue of quote-unquote humane animal farming. Need a little clicker. Oh, is this a clicker? All right, exciting. Oh, I went the wrong way, didn't I? Figure this out first. All right. These are my two goals for the presentation today. I want to educate you all and dismantle the lies that animal agriculture, particularly the egg industry, from small backyard farming to large industrial farming, tells us that makes us feel comfortable and confident in buying eggs, and why those are all lies and myths. I'm going to do that through storytelling. I'm going to tell you some stories of the chickens we have rescued from the egg industry. I also want to empower you. It's one thing for me to chat up here and talk to you about my experiences, but the only way we're going to get change to occur is if all of you empower yourselves to make your own personal changes with your own behavior and also influence the people in your lives to help encourage them to change as well. Ooh. Sorry, I get very excited about little chickens. And we have in the audience Jan, who is our Rescue Ranch manager, superstar. And we also have two of our caregivers, Katie and Hannah, from our Grass Valley Sanctuary. So really happy to have them all here. And feel free to ask them questions after the presentation as well. So I'm focusing on our Rescue Ranch program. Back in 2009, we purchased a property in Grass Valley to move all the animals to. We were changing our entire location, basically, from Vacaville to Grass Valley. And so I pitched this idea to my boss, Kim Sturla, who founded the sanctuary, who's an amazing advocate for farmed animals. And I said, can we keep our sanctuary? Can we change it into something that would save so many more lives than our permanent sanctuary ever could? And the cool thing about Animal Place, and I'm not just saying this because I've been there for 12 years, but Animal Place is always willing to try basically anything. So she said yes to this. And a private donor wanted to fund this program. They named it Rescue Ranch, I think it's an appropriate name. And the entire goal of Rescue Ranch is to save as many lives as possible. We work mostly with egg farmers to offer them an alternative to, in California, most hens are gassed and trashed in landfills. They have no economical value, and so we offer them an alternative to killing those birds. We have a capacity of about 2,000 chickens at our Rescue Ranch facility. And what do we have there right now? How many? 1,800 from a couple of rescues we just did. And since that program started, and the unique aspect of that program is we have a full-time adoption coordinator, Jacinda, who screens all potential adopters, and we find them homes. So instead of just providing safe haven for a permanent life, we're able to get these chickens, mostly whole and healthy and really birds again, and find them permanent placement. So since that program started, we've saved 20,294 lives. 20,000 of those are hens from the egg industry. So the way I want to structure this presentation is to talk about some of those hens we rescued and how it's the similarities between small-scale animal agriculture and large-scale animal agriculture that are more provocative, that's more interesting, that's more pertinent to this discussion of whether you can compassionately, quote-unquote, and ethically take somebody's life or exploit them for their milk or, in this case, their eggs. So we have 3 hens here. This is Rosie on the left, and she's from a rescue we did last year from an organic pasture-based farm. And then we have Susie, who is from our most recent rescue of, was it 2 weeks ago? Not that long ago, of 1,300 hens from a battery cage facility. And then here is Felicity, and Felicity is from another rescue we did in 2012. We call it the Turlock Rescue. Some of you may be familiar with it. It was a facility that had 50,000 birds, and the farmers left the birds without food for more than 2 weeks because they couldn't afford to feed them anymore. And we were lucky enough to be able to go in and save as many hens as we could. It was about 4,460 hens we saved. She's one of the few survivors of that rescue. So in the egg industry, whether you're supplying chickens for backyard farming, organic farming, pasture-based, free-range, cage-free, caged facilities, all of these chickens start their lives in a hatchery. In nature, under natural conditions, what really happens is a hen sits on a nest of maybe 5 to 7 eggs, and she sits on that nest for about 27 days. And as she gets closer, as those eggs get closer to hatching, she starts talking to them. And those chicks start talking back. And it's one of the most important social bonds that develop before those animals ever take their first breath out of the egg. It's very common in many bird species. And what is really, I think, so incredibly tragic about the way the egg industry, be it for small-scale or large-scale farming, is that we've denied billions of chickens their mother's voice. And it's a really, oh, damn it. Sorry. I was going to try not to get too emotional, but it just, you think of these little babies who are just looking, they're trying to find their mother's voice. And when they hatch, they're constantly looking for their mother. And that we deny that to literally 10 billion chickens and turkeys is one of, I think, the worst things that we have done to chickens. But what's really interesting about the chickens we rescue is we often know an enormous amount of information about these birds. We know what hatchery they came from. We know what they've been vaccinated against. We know what health tests have been done. We know their age. We are much more familiar with their backstory than we are with a lot of the animals we rescue. We oftentimes don't know where many of the animals we rescue come from or how they came to be. They just needed rescuing. In the case of all 3 of these chickens, and as a reminder, Rosie is from an organic, free-range farm, and these 2, Susie and Felicity, are from 2 different battery cage farms, but they all originated from the same hatchery. Highline Hatchery is probably the world's largest hatchery. It's found in over 120 countries. If any of you buy eggs in the United States, 80% of all white eggs come from chickens who originated in a Highline hatchery. If you buy brown eggs, 50% of the world's eggs come from hens who originated in Highline hatcheries. They're very large corporation. So how did these girls start their lives? In an artificial incubator. So these are large warehouses where up to 300,000 eggs are artificially turned and artificially incubated for 27 days until they're all hatched. As you can imagine, that's a lot of chickens. So when they are born, the egg industry is structured differently than the meat industry or the chicken flesh industry. The rooster chicks, male chicks, don't grow at the same rate as the breeds used for meat production, so they have very little value to the egg industry. So this is what happens to male chicks, and this does not matter if you buy eggs from your local farmer's market, from organic farms, from free-range farms, pasture-based farms, cage-free farms. If you are an ethical vegetarian, or if you oppose killing animals for consumption or for no other reason than they're born a male, then don't eat eggs. In the egg industry, all these male chicks are killed the day they are hatched. It's between 150 to 200 million male chicks every year. There's no known accurate number because they don't keep track of all individual male chicks who are killed. So we can only guesstimate based on the number of female chicks who are hatched in the egg industry. The American Veterinary Medical Association's approved method of killing unwanted male chicks is called maceration. It is literally a large industrial grinder that these male chicks, who are fully conscious, are thrown into. It's a horrible way to die. So that's what happens to the male chicks in virtually all farms that are selling eggs. The female chicks, they go on, and this is what's called a debeaking machine. This is a highline hatchery debeaking machine. And debeaking occurs to probably 98% of all hens in the egg industry. Hens on conventional egg farms, where most people get their eggs from, hens on cage-free farms, and then hens on really large free-range operations are all debeaked. The beak of a chicken is like their thumb and their mouth combined. It's an incredibly vital appendage. It has nerves and blood vessels that run virtually to the tip. It's incredibly painful. They're lasered off. Up to 50% of their beaks are cut off. It leaves them, if you've ever met a hen at a sanctuary who's been rescued from an egg farm, it leaves them completely deformed and mutilated and in pain for the remainder of their lives. They cannot groom themselves effectively. They have trouble maintaining their social structure because they're at a disadvantage to hens who have a full beak. They have to be fed. We feed them like in deep dishes so that they can get to the food effectively. And that's what they do for virtually every single farm that produces eggs for commercial sale. I'm just going to take a drink of water. Bear with me. So I want to talk a little bit about how these hens, after they have survived the hatchery, how they live. So for 90 to 95% of all hens in the egg industry, they live in what are called battery cages. I think most people, probably most of you here, are familiar with battery cages. This is an aerial view of a farm in Michigan that has almost 3 million birds. These are very large facilities. And they live in cages where there's anywhere between 4 to 10 hens in one cage. A lot of people feel more comfortable buying eggs from a cage-free facility. The cage-free label is literally just means they're not in cages. It does not mean that they have necessarily an improved welfare. They're still all debeaked. And as you can see, this is a cage-free facility. The stocking density, as they call it in the industry, is still pretty intense. They have anywhere from 100 to 120 square inches per bird. In a battery cage, they may have anywhere from 50 to 80 square inches per bird. So they have an improved amount of space. They debeak these chickens because when you take a really social species like chickens and you put them in confinement where they can't express their normal behaviors, they engage in abnormal behaviors. So they peck at each other, and that submissive bird can't escape because there's nowhere for her to go. And so they'll often peck and peck and peck, trying to get her to go away, but she can't. So instead of giving more space, more room, they cut off body parts. This is very similar to a pasture-based farm, a couple of pasture-based farms we've rescued birds from. So they have outdoor access. They're not usually debeaked. So why do we oppose pasture-based farming? I'm going to share with you in just a little bit the story of 500 hens we saved from a certified humane organic farm. And hopefully that story itself highlights why there are so many problems with labels. Oh, speaking of. So labeling, egg industry, all farming industries are really, really good at convincing consumers to feel good and happy and content about the purchases they're making. So the way that they market their products are very often not the reality that the animals themselves experience. This is a farm called Judy's Family Farm. Sounds so nice. This is a picture of their farm on their website that they put up. It's so pretty with all their grass, and it's very bucolic, and it's a pasture-based farm. And they even marketed, they don't do this anymore because they were sued by the Animal Legal Defense Fund, but they used to say in their egg cartons that these hens are raised in wide open spaces in Sonoma Valley where they're free to roam, scratch, and play. And of course, their labels, certified humane, organic, old-fashioned, family farm, cute little kids there with their bonnets from like the 1800s or something. But this is how the birds actually live. So they're all debeaked. They're all inside what are essentially large sheds. They don't have outdoor access. So they were basically lying to consumers about how their hens were raised and treated. And the reason they don't have outdoor access is that the organic standards in California are a little weird. Organic is probably the only meaningful label that has enforceable regulations. And one of those regulations is that chickens do have to have access to outdoors. They make exemptions in California because of our high rates of avian influenza and other zoonotic and highly contagious diseases. So they can still label their products organic, but not give the birds outdoor access. This is what Judy's Family Farm looks like from an aerial view. And if you remember the slide before with the battery cage farm, I can't see much difference in these two facilities. I don't know, can you? They look pretty similar to me. So this is how a lot of farms get away with lying to consumers. They're not open to the public. They're in very rural areas, so people often don't see them. The chickens themselves are hidden behind closed doors, so they're out of public eye. So they get away with it very, very effectively and easily. So what about organic? As I said, organic is one of the few labels that actually has enforceable regulations. They're not often enforced, but they do actually have some meaning versus cage-free or free-range or natural, whatever those things mean. So I want to introduce you to some hens we rescued from an organic free-range farm. This is a farm that is in Northern California. They said we have several hundred hens who we need to get rid of, meaning they need to slaughter them or depopulate. Do you want to come out and take some? And we had space at our facility, and we said yes. And our expectation, because all of us who have done these rescues have been inside battery cage farms and cage-free farms, was that this farm would probably be better. This would be a nicer farm for the birds than a battery cage farm. And the first thing that you notice when you drive up to this property is the smell of moldy food. They have big vats of grains and their food just out in the open, so exposed to all the elements. It's organic food, but it's also not the kind of food you want to feed to these chickens because it is moldy and it's disgusting. So that's the first thing we noticed. The second thing we noticed, there wasn't any grass. There was no pasture. There was no graze for the chickens to forage on. It was one big open dirt lot. And we thought, well, this is weird. But then we thought about where this farm is located. It's located in a part of California that gets green maybe 2 times in the year. January and February when they get rain, and the rest of the year it's a pretty dry place. But they're calling this facility organic, free-range, pasture-based. They sell their eggs for $10 a dozen at the farmer's market. So they've done a good job of convincing people that this is a nice place. We were catching these birds at night, which is what we often do because chickens are, they sleep at night, they roost up in the trees, they have terrible night vision, so they're very calm and easier to handle and it's less stressful. So we didn't notice how these birds looked until daylight, until Jan actually was unloading them at Rescue Ranch, and then you could start hearing the wheezing and the sneezing and the terrible respiratory infections that they had. There were several dozen birds who had no eyes because they had been left untreated. They had these giant abscesses. And the reason they had these abscesses is because they had treatable diseases that the farm could not and would not treat. Because if you want to be organic, you cannot give antibiotics to the animals in your care. So these birds were denied life-saving treatment because this farmer wanted to maintain organic status. And this is very common in the organic industry. It's very common that farmers will not treat individual animals or flocks or herds with life-saving medication because they don't want to lose their organic label. These birds were not adoptable. We could not place these birds. We were fortunate enough to get funding to set up a very biosecure separate facility for these hens, and they will get to live out the rest of their lives. But they're never going to recover from what has happened to them because they were left so ill for so long because this guy just didn't want to, he wanted to sell $10 a dozen. That was his bottom line. This is where this is why I have egg cartons. Never been used, so don't worry about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about production levels. And the reason I want to talk about it is because let's say you can get past everything I just told you, and you can say, well, what if I have backyard chickens, or it's a really small farm, and I know they're not going to kill the chickens, and maybe they even keep all the roosters alive, some magical farm someplace. I want to talk about what we've done to the bodies of these birds. This is Irma. She's Irma-tastic. When she needs to lay an egg, you can hear her from like a quarter mile away. She has like this song she sings, the song of her people, to tell you about her laying an egg. So Irma's this little tiny bantam chicken. She's like, like that big. She's super cute. She's 13. She's tinier. She's an older chicken. Bantam, smaller chickens tend to live longer than protection birds. And she's the kind of chicken who lays a normal amount of eggs. So she will lay, maybe this is how many eggs she'll lay in a year. And she'll lay them in the spring and the summer, because I think a lot of people forget what egg production really is about. It's about producing baby chickens. It's about producing the next generation. It's not about producing eggs for people to consume. So a normal number of eggs to produce the next generation is about 24 in a year. Some chickens may have 3 clutches and maybe produce 40 eggs a year. In the winter, they stop laying eggs because it's not beneficial. It doesn't make any sense to produce eggs during a time when you don't have enough food and resources. So this is a normal amount. Normal. Ooh, it's Taylor. Taylor's from a free-range organic farm, from a different rescue. These chickens were all confiscated by animal control because they were in such horrific condition. She's called a speckled Sussex. It's a type of chicken used for their flesh and for their egg production. So she has been bred to produce about 140 eggs a year. It's about 11 dozen eggs in a year. And that's a lot of eggs. It takes a real strain and tax on their bodies, but it's really nothing compared to what the typical chicken used for egg production is forced to produce in a year. So we have 2 hens here. One is a red sex-link. They're the kind of chickens who produce brown eggs, and then a white leghorn, who's the most common type of chicken who produces the white eggs. And I put my microphone down to this. So these chickens have been bred to produce between 260 to 300 eggs a year. It's about 22 to 25 dozen eggs in a year. And coincidentally, the average American consumer eats about 250 to 260 eggs in a year. So they have essentially bred chickens to produce, one chicken produce enough eggs for the average American consumer to consume in a year. If you've ever met these chickens, they're incredibly scrawny animals. They rarely weigh more than 4 pounds. When we first rescue them, they're often like 2 pounds. Their bodies are just so focused on spending all their energy in producing eggs that they have no energy to lay down muscle or fat or any of the other important things that we all do to survive. These are some of the side effects of overproduction, and this isn't something that we can fix. We can save these girls from battery cages, we can save them from, we can treat their disease, we can get them strong, we can heal their wounds, their trauma, but we can never overcome what breeding has done to them. So these girls have high rates of osteoporosis, and you can imagine why. A normal chicken has a little store of calcium she uses to produce that egg shell, and then that calcium is depleted, and then it's grows back, essentially. She makes more for the next clutch of eggs. A chicken who's producing 300 eggs in a year cannot do that. The only other source of calcium that she has is in her bones. So she starts leaching calcium from her bones, and that's why they have such high rates of osteoporosis. We've had chickens who we've rescued from battery cages whack their wing on a pole and break their wing. They're such fragile animals because of what the egg industry has done to them. They have incredibly high rates of ovarian cancer. Human beings are the only other species that has such high rates of ovarian cancer. They use the white leghorn extensively in cancer research because of how much cancer these hens get. They're just flooded with so many hormones, and they're producing too many eggs that cancer is very common for these girls. Their bodies there's a reason the egg industry calls these hens spent. That's the term that they use when they're only about a year or two old. And that's because their bodies are literally drained of all their energy and all their life. So eggs get stuck inside of them because their muscles just are so weak that they can't even push those eggs out. They get infections very easily, and those infections get inside their body, and then they die from them. Prolapses. We sometimes pull hens from cages. Their oviduct is coming out of their vent. Fun fact, the vent is the same hole that their shit and piss comes out of, as well as their eggs. So it's where everything comes out of. It's a one-stop expulsion zone. So what happens when they're so overworked and overtaxed, their muscles start to weaken. They don't hold their body parts in anymore, and their oviduct is literally their reproductive tract is coming out of their vent. Sometimes we can fix it. We can literally push it back inside, or they can have surgery. But if it's so severe and it gets necrotic and dead, that's the death of the chicken. They have very sensitive immune systems. Part of that is from living inside cages, but part of that is just from breeding practices that focus so much on egg production and not on good quality health. And they have shortened lifespans. So even after we save these girls, these hens, and we give them a chance at being whole again and learning to fly and perch and be chickens again, we can't undo what's been done to them. So Irma, who's 13, she'll probably live, I think, forever, personally. But bantam chickens can live into their late teens. Healthy, smaller chickens can live 8 to 12 years. These girls rarely make it past the age of 5. So even after we rescue them, it's very unusual for them to survive past the age of 5. So after these hens have produced about 600 eggs in their commercial life, thank you, what happens to them? Except for the hens we rescue, there's no sanctuary, there's no retirement farm for them. There aren't, 300 million hens who get killed every year who, end up out of the egg farm and end up in sanctuaries. They're all killed. So for most of the United States, spent hens, quote unquote, are transported the same way as chickens used for their flesh. So in large transport trucks with birds crammed inside. And then they're slaughtered on these conveyor belts, usually with an automatic neck slicer. Chickens are exempt from our 2 main federal pieces of legislation. They're exempt from the Federal Methods of Humane Slaughter Act, and they're exempt from the 28-hour transport law. So that means these birds can be transported for more than 28 hours without food and water to the slaughterhouse. It means that they don't have to be stunned insensible to pain before they are killed. So on most slaughterhouses in the United States, these chickens They're already really fragile, so about 40% of them will have bone breaks during the killing process or even before they arrive to the slaughterhouse because they're so fragile. They're run through what is called an electrified water bath, so their heads are run through electrified water. This is supposed to kill them, but more often than not, it just renders them immobile. So they're still conscious when that automatic blade comes by and slices into their neck. And then they have a backup killer, who's a human being, who then further makes sure that they're dead. So this is what happens to most spent hens in the United States, with a few exceptions. California does not have any commercial slaughterhouse in the state that accepts spent laying hens. So they do not even have enough commercial value to be transported to a slaughterhouse and used for companion animal food or for chicken nuggets or whatever post-processing these birds go through. So in California, and I've seen it done several times, they're gassed, and it's considered quote-unquote more humane. And I just want to share a story, and I share this story because for 2 years I didn't ever talk about this because I felt so guilty. We were at a farm. This was in 2013, and this was a battery cage farm, and we were working alongside the catchers. So we're out there gently pulling these hens from these cages, being as kind as possible and putting them in crates for transport to our rescue ranch facility. And then right next door are the catchers who get paid by how many hens they can kill. And so they're just whipping these birds out of the cages. And the way that they gas them at this farm, and it's so iconic of how the egg industry sees spent laying hens, they're literally giant garbage bins, and they throw 50 birds in this bin. So the birds on the bottom are being smothered to death. And then they cover the top and they funnel in carbon dioxide. And it's not a tight seal, so it's not effective. But we were leaving, and so I was the last vehicle leaving, driving our stock trailer with 500 little lives in the back who were so excited to show the world to. And I looked to my left, and there's this big pile of just white, and it's all these dead birds. And they've been gassed, but not all of them get gassed. And so this little hen popped up, and she hadn't been killed. And I wish to this day that I had just slammed on the brakes and just run across the farm and grabbed that little girl. But I didn't have time. And so the way that they kill those hens is they pick them up by the neck and they swing them around until their necks break. And you think of everything that these birds have already endured and that they're trash to these people. And it's not just because the farm wants to make money, it's because people want eggs. People want to buy eggs, and they want them cheap. And this is a cheap way to kill chickens. And then all their bodies are taken to a landfill. They're literally trash in California, the white leghorns, these white girls. These are my key takeaways. Male chicks are always killed. I didn't really talk about it, but they're the birds used for breeding who produce the hens used for egg production. They all live indoors, they're debeaked, and they're all slaughtered when they're about 18 months old. So they're all killed, and that's regardless of mail order hatcheries, feed stores, small farms, big farms. Hens they're stuck in these bodies that are suffering and will always suffer. As much love and compassion and care as they can give, as our caregivers can give, we can't overcome what's been done to their bodies. And then the hens are killed only at a fraction of their lifespans. They're a year or two old when they're sent to slaughter. And then 98% of all hens are mutilated and their beaks cut off. So how can you help? Certainly if you're not already vegan, please consider going vegan. There are a lot of great ways to replace eggs in your diet. We have a little pamphlet, Humane Eating Wallet Guide at our table, which you're welcome to take. There's the vegan egg, and there's plenty of ways to replace eggs in baking and cooking. Volunteer your time. I think one of the unique ways that you can have firsthand experience is by volunteering with Animal Place. Every time we go on a rescue, we make sure we take people who've never been before. So we bring volunteers and interns and staff who haven't attended a rescue because I can tell you that story, and it's very hard for me to talk about it, and I'm sure it's for some of you a very emotional story as well. But how much more powerful is it if you can then take that and have that actual experience and say, you know what, I was in that farm, I smelled it. I was in 2 feet of their manure trying to help a hen who had escaped. I had this personal experience. So volunteering your time at a sanctuary is a great way to garner firsthand experience and influence your circle of peers, your friends, your family, your colleagues. If you are able, we have a thriving adoption program. So we encourage people to adopt the chickens we rescue and save from slaughter. What was really cool about this program is that when we first started, only about 20% of the people who adopted from us were feeding the eggs back to the chickens. And we encourage feeding eggs back to the chickens, 1, because they're their eggs, 2, because they love it, and 3, because it gives them that calcium and protein that they've lost from overlaying. And since we've started educating adopters, almost 60% of our adopters are now sharing and feeding the eggs back to the birds, and 80% of them have reduced or stopped consuming other animal products and purchasing them from supermarkets. So it's a sign that they're taking in the information we've given them, and that these chickens are just doing a fabulous job of creating change in their own way by just being themselves. Share their stories. We don't have a lot of time, but if there's maybe 1 or 2 questions. Thank you.
I'm just curious, like the farms that you visit, especially the organic farm that you were at, or any of the other farms, like the workers there, like, is there like such a complete cognitive dissonance, like between the workers that are like farming these chickens and their actions? Like, where's the empathy? Like, do you see that with the farmers at all, or is they just totally like?
I actually have seen more empathy with the battery cage farmer that we work with. He's like a 3rd-generation egg farmer, and his grandpa, his dad, they do not understand why he works with us. There's no cost benefit for him, but he calls us up every year to come out and save as many birds as possible. The other farms, no, I've seen people who say that we had one worker who said they loved working with the chickens instead of the cows at this pasture-based farm, and then you just watch him as he grabs this. He just broke her wing, just grabbing her. I think there's a huge disconnect, because I don't know how you can justify how you're treating these animals if you don't just totally. I mean, when we go on these rescues, we shut down because it's just too freaking overwhelming and horrifying otherwise. So I know everyone can do it, and I think they just do it every day. Yeah. Yes, Hannah.
You seem like such a cool person. Do you have a cool nickname?
Oh my gosh. I have a very cool nickname given to me by Hannah. It's Marji Berry. You are welcome to use it at any time. Any other questions? Yeah.
What about nutrition? Because the friends that I have that are not vegan, they feel that they have to eat eggs in the morning for protein.
Yeah.
And I work in a hospital where doctors don't know hardly anything about nutrition. Could you help?
Nutritionfacts.org.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not a nutritionist. It's tough. Eggs are a powerhouse of protein as well as a powerhouse of cholesterol.
How many grams of protein are in an egg?
I do not.
6 grams.
That's a lot.
That's not a lot. Actually, a cup of oats is equal to 6 grams, a cup of peas. So
Right.
it's not the perfect food. You don't need it.
Well, no, absolutely. I think we've established pretty effectively. I've been vegan for, like 15 years, that you can certainly get as many nutrients from a vegan diet as from a meat-based diet.
But a lot of people don't know that.
No, I know, but I think the more that we talk to people about it, the more that they do know. Yeah. So, but I'm not a nutritionist, so I can't really comment on replacements and things like that. Yeah.
So I have a friend, and she has heirloom chickens in her huge backyard up in, like, England somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And she feeds them, organic feed and everything. Now, is there a downside to getting eggs, like, from my friend who's nice to her backyard chickens?
Well, I'm sure she loves her chickens, and I hope she keeps them for the remainder of their lives. We adopt out to people who do eat their eggs. It's something we struggle with, but we also want to be able to save as many hens from the egg industry as we can. I think the issues still apply. They're not meant to lay an egg a day. They're not meant to lay 140 eggs a year. So those chickens are still as prone to significant health issues than chickens like Irma And where they got those chickens, I'm guessing they got them from a feed store or a mail order hatchery, and male chicks are all killed in mail order hatcheries, or they're used as packing peanuts. That's the term they use to keep the hen chicks warm. So that's why we get like 5 calls a day about roosters. And then a lot of people who get backyard chickens don't keep them for their whole lives. She may, but a lot of people don't because they want the egg. I think the more that we see chickens as commodities and not as intelligent, individual, social, engaging animals, they're really incredible creatures. It's a lot easier to commodify them and mistreat them. I think that I'll be at the Animal Places table, so you're welcome to come and ask me any questions afterwards. Thank you guys so much.